My name is Allie, and my pop is titled Between Burden and Belonging, a holistic single case study examining factors influencing suicidal ideation among undergraduate college students in Missouri. I want to start by grounding this study in the problem and briefly situating it within the literature. Suicidality among Generation Z young adults has become a serious public health concern, and traditional undergraduate students are experiencing a unique set of mental health challenges that make this issue especially urgent in higher education. National data show that a meaningful number of undergraduates report seriously considering suicide, and these patterns are happening alongside broader increases in anxiety, depression, and emotional distress among Generation Z. For many students, these challenges were intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic, which disrupted social connection and contributed to increases in isolation, substance use, and other maladaptive coping behaviors. Taken together, this points to a generation of students navigating college within a context of heightened mental health vulnerability. At the state level, this issue is just as concerning. In Missouri, where this study takes place, a large percentage of college students report lifetime and recent suicidal ideation, yet fewer than half of those students report seeking help. At the same time, limited access to mental health care, particularly shortage of providers, creates additional barriers for students who are already in distress. These conditions make it critical to better understand how students experience suicidality within their campus environments. The literature suggests that suicidal ideation among traditional undergraduate students is shaped by a combination of factors, including digital influence, academic and financial stress, stigma, and barriers to help seeking. Importantly, research also highlights the role of belonging and well-being. Students who feel disconnected from their institution or perceive themselves as a burden to others are significantly more likely to experience suicidal thoughts. Overall, this body of research makes it clear that suicidality among traditional undergraduate students is not just an individual mental health issue, but one that is deeply relational and tied to institutional contexts. What remains less well understood, though, is how students experience and make meaning of these dynamics. That gap in understanding limits how effectively higher education can respond, and is the problem of practice that this study specifically is designed to address. With that context in mind, I want to briefly talk about the purpose of the study and the research question guiding it. The purpose of the single case study was to explore the factors that students at one university in Missouri describe as influencing their experience of suicidal ideation. Rather than focusing on prevalence or outcomes, this study centers how students themselves understand and describe what shapes their mental health and distress. The guiding research question for the study was, what factors do students at one university in Missouri describe as influencing their experience of suicidal ideation? This question was intentionally broad to allow students to name what felt most significant in their own experiences, while still remaining grounded in a clear conceptual framework. The findings from this study are intended to inform multiple groups involved in supporting undergraduate student well-being, including student affairs professionals, faculty and academic advisors, institutional leaders, and researchers in higher education and mental health. By centering students' lived experiences, this research offers insight into how perceived burdensomeness, thwarted belongingness, and institutional contexts shape suicidal ideation, with the goal of supporting more responsive and meaningful approaches to prevention and care. This study is grounded in Thomas Joiner's interpersonal theory of suicide. Joiner's interpersonal theory of suicide explains suicidal ideation as emerging from the interaction of three key components: perceived burdensomeness, thwarted belongingness, and the capability for suicide. Perceived burdensomeness refers to the belief that one is a burden on others, while thwarted belongingness reflects a lack of meaningful connection or feeling socially isolated. The theory suggests that when these two experiences co-occur, individuals are more likely to experience suicidal ideation. While the full theory also includes acquired capability for suicide, this study focuses specifically on perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness. These constructs align closely with what the literature identifies as central to undergraduate mental health, and, importantly, with what the study sought to explore: the emotional and relational experiences that come before suicidal thoughts, rather than behaviors or attempts. This framework was particularly useful for a qualitative study because it centers interpersonal and contextual experiences. It allowed me to examine how students describe feeling like a burden, struggle to belong, and navigating institutional environments that may intensify or alleviate those feelings. Rather than measuring these constructs, the theory provided a lens for understanding of how students make meaning of their experiences of distress and suicidal ideation within the college setting. Next, I'm going to zoom out and walk through the methodology, just the big pieces, the design, the site, and the participants, and the data collection methods. For this study, I chose a qualitative, holistic single case study design. I chose this case study approach because suicidal ideation is complex. It's shaped by psychological, social, and environmental factors that don't operate in isolation. And because my research focus is on how students describe the factors shaping their experience, qualitative methods were the best fit for capturing the nuance, context, and meaning in students' own words. This was a single bonded case study, meaning that one university in Missouri, Walter University, which is a pseudonym, the case was bounded to the institution and to traditional undergraduate students aged 18 to 24 who self-disclosed experiencing suicidal ideation while enrolled. In terms of participants, I used purposeful sampling because I wanted to recruit students who could speak directly to the phenomenon that I was studying. 4 students met the inclusion criteria and participated in the study, and all participants were assigned pseudonyms to protect their confidentiality. For data collection, I used 2 primary sources, a one-time reflective journal and a semi-structured interview. The reflective journal included 3 separate prompts and was distributed through Qualtrics. Participants could either respond by writing or by video or by both, and all 4 participants actually chose to complete both written and video responses for each prompt. I designed the journal prompts to align with Joiner's framework, so students reflected on experiences connected to both perceived burdensomeness and belonging and how they cope with emotional pain. Then I conducted one semi-structured interview with each participant, approximately 60 minutes, during the summer of 2025. The interviews were intentionally shaped by what participants shared in their journals, so I reviewed their reflections ahead of time and tailored follow-up questions to go deeper into what they had already named as important for themselves. Interviews were conducted in person in a private space near our counseling center, and participants were provided with mental health resources throughout the entire process, every step. Finally, I analyzed the data using an iterative coding process grounded in participants' narratives and informed by Joiner's theory, specifically focusing on perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness, and then identifying coping strategies that emerged across the data. So overall, 1 case, 1 site, 4 participants, and 2 main data sources, reflective journals and semi-structured interviews, designed to center student voice and really get a detailed understanding of what shapes suicidal ideation in this context. Now that I've walked through the purpose, framework, and methods, I want to shift into what I learned from my participants. What I found is that suicidal ideation wasn't shaped by one big factor. Instead, it was influenced by an ongoing interaction between burden, belonging, pressure, and coping in participants' day-to-day lives. The first theme was perceived burden on family and friends. My participants described feeling a strong sense of guilt, financial guilt, emotional guilt, and a need to justify the support that they received. Even when support was available, many didn't feel entitled to use it. They carefully monitored their needs and emotions because they didn't want to come across as too much. The second theme was academic, emotional, and social pressures. Participants described intense expectations, not just to perform academically, but to appear capable and emotionally fine while doing so. Constant comparison made many feel behind, even when they were objectively succeeding. Pressure wasn't just about grades, it was about performing stability. The third theme highlights what helped. Feeling included reduced invisibility and distress. Moments of being noticed and remembered or invited, often small ones, had a powerful impact, and these moments helped participants feel like they mattered and disrupted feelings of invisibility, even if briefly. The fourth theme is the flip side. Disconnection intensified distress. This wasn't always overt rejection. More often it was subtle. Surface level relationships, feeling unseen in groups, or believing that no one would notice if they disappeared. These experiences fueled self-doubt and isolation and often deepened distress. The final theme was coping strategies. Every participant was actively trying to manage distress through structure, routines, movement, and private processing like journaling. At the same time, participants also described masking, withdrawal, and distraction when vulnerability didn't feel safe. Coping wasn't simply an adaptive or maladaptive behavior. It reflected a tension between wanting connection and feeling unable to ask for it. Taken together, these themes show that suicidal ideation was shaped for them by a deeply relational experience of campus life. Perceived burdensomeness and belonging were central, and coping often functioned as the bridge between them. This is where I zoom out a bit and connect what participants shared back to the framework in the broader research. At a high level, my findings line up really closely with Joyner's interpersonal theory of suicide, specifically the idea that suicidal ideation is more likely when perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness are happening at the same time. In simple terms, when students feel like a burden and feel disconnected, that combination is especially painful. That exact dynamic showed up across participants' stories. Burdensomeness often came through as guilt, financial guilt, guilt about needing support, and a strong desire to not inconvenience others emotionally. Belongingness showed up as invisibility, students describing surface level relationships and feeling present in spaces but not really known. And what's important here is that these weren't just individual feelings. Participants' experiences pointed to relational and institutional factors shaping them. Things like high achievement culture, constant comparison, and campus norms that quietly reward being productive, composed, and self-sufficient. One thing that didn't really emerge was acquired capability, which is also part of Joyner's theory. Instead, what emerged strongly was coping, how students tried to manage distress in real time. That included things like structure, movement, and journaling, but also masking and withdrawal when vulnerability didn't feel safe. So overall, these findings support the theory. Burden and disconnection matter, but they also add context. In college environments, institutional culture can amplify both, and coping becomes the bridge students use to stay afloat. I want to talk about implications and recommendations, and I want to be really clear up front that these findings point to more than individual level interventions. Across all 5 themes, burden, pressure, inclusion, disconnection, and coping, what came through is that students' experiences of suicidal ideation were shaped by relational and institutional contexts, not just personal vulnerability. Belonging, guilt, and self-expectation were deeply intertwined, and students were constantly navigating how much space they were allowed to take up. Because of that, the implications fall across 4 groups. First, student affairs professionals. The data reinforce how powerful everyday connection really is. Small moments of being seen or remembered mattered, and so did moments of invisibility. The implication is that belonging isn't just a program outcome, it's a condition of emotional safety. Relational, trauma-informed practice and resisting cultures that equate busyness with worth can directly reduce distress. Second, faculty and academic advisors. Participants were clear that academic spaces shaped how they interpreted their value. Feeling noticed reduced isolation, and visibility intensified it. The implication is that academic success and emotional well-being aren't separate. Normalizing struggle, checking in when students disengage, and framing help-seeking as strength can disrupt perfectionism and stigma. Third, institutional leaders and policymakers. The findings suggest that unchecked high-achievement culture can reinforce exhaustion and emotional concealment. Policies, messaging, and reward structures matter. Leaders shape whether belonging and well-being are treated as central to institutional excellence or as add-ons, and alignment across systems can change how students experience pressure and support. And finally, researchers in higher education and mental health. These findings point to the need for research that looks beyond individual risk factors and examines how institutional culture and everyday interactions shape distress. Future work should center student voice and focus on relational outcomes like mattering and emotional safety. In terms of limitations, the findings are not intended to be broadly generalizable. This was a small qualitative sample, meaning the results do not represent the experiences of all traditional undergraduate students nationwide. The study also relied entirely on self-reported data through written and video reflective journals and interviews. Given the sensitive nature of suicidal ideation, this introduces the possibility of response bias, including over-reporting or under-reporting experiences. Data were collected within a specific time frame, so the study does not capture how participants' experiences or perceptions may shift over time or across different points in the academic cycle. Finally, because the study was conducted at a single university in Missouri, the findings are context-specific and shaped by cultural, institutional, and demographic characteristics of that campus. The findings of the study have important implications for how colleges and universities strengthen belonging, connection, and care across a student experience. My distribution plan really focuses on getting these insights into the hands of people positioned to turn them into practice and policy. Dissemination will include campus-based professional development and leadership meetings, conference presentations, executive briefings for institutional leaders, and practice-oriented workshops on my home campus. Together, these strategies are designed to move the findings beyond scholarship.